Conservatives have a bad habit, and I'm trying to come up with a name for it. But first, I'll describe it. They see the Hindu statue in Texas, or the planned Muslim city in Texas, and they start debating about the First Amendment. They see the guy who moved here from India trying to impeach the president, and their minds jump to the merits of his case, or lack thereof. What they won't do is say out loud what's on their minds, namely that all of these things are weird and bad and shouldn't be happening. We shouldn't have huge Muslim cities in Texas, or huge Hindu statues, or state representatives who can't pronounce representatives.
Representatives.
Trump is right. Even our leftoids aren't made in America anymore. But conservatives feel like they can't have an opinion about something unless they have a legal or scientific argument. You get the feeling that if a raccoon showed up in their kitchen, they'd start figuring out how to sue it for squatting. And once conservatives decide something should be stopped, they try to stop it in a way that sounds neutral and objective. Take the example of someone who's trying to get rid of the Hindu statue. He'll propose that we make a law against any religious displays, or that religious displays should only come to a certain height. I'm not anti-Hindu, I'm just anti-things that are tall. Or the person who's trying to stop trans surgeries. He'll try to find studies showing that people regret getting them. Even when conservatives know what they want, they'll struggle for a standard to appeal to. They'll appeal to science, they'll appeal to reason, they definitely won't appeal to religious dogma, though they should, but one standard gets consistently left out of the discussion. Some call it common sense. Russell Kirk called it folk wisdom or folk law, and Edmund Burke called it prejudice. Here's Burke. You see, sir, that in this enlightened age, I am bold enough to confess that we are generally men of untaught feelings, that instead of casting away all our old prejudices, we cherish them to a very considerable degree. And to take more shame to ourselves, we cherish them because they are prejudices. And the longer they have lasted, and the more generally they have prevailed, the more we cherish them. We're embarrassed to talk this way. We assume pre-rational judgment is always unfair. We want all of our opinions to come from double-blind studies or careful deliberation. But it was also controversial at the time. When Burke was writing, Enlightenment rationalism was what every smart person thought, and here he was defending untaught feelings. But why are they necessary? Aren't people capable of thinking through issues on their own? Burke didn't think so. We are afraid to put men to live and trade each on his own private stock of reason, because we suspect that the stock in each man is small, and that the individuals would do better to avail themselves of the general bank and capital of nations and of ages. Now, there's an important distinction here. I'm not saying that all human beings intuitively know what's right, as if everyone, given enough time and the right armchair, would come up with the same conclusions about the world. That's like expecting everyone who picks up a guitar to eventually write Stairway to Heaven. Remember, some cultures are prejudiced against bathing. But Burke was an Englishman writing to a Frenchman. He saw the French throwing away generations of good prejudices and embracing chaos. Healthy prejudices come from healthy cultures. As we lose our culture, we can no longer take advantage of that general bank and capital of nations and of ages. And we've been taught to think of that capital as being evil. But of course, every advantage that previous Americans gave to modern Americans is supposed to be evil. We're subjected to a sort of cultural inheritance tax. But if we're repulsed at something evil or attracted to something good, even when we can't explain it, we should be grateful for that. We shouldn't leave it to each new generation to discover fire for themselves. This kind of prejudice is what culture is built on. Without it, we tie ourselves in knots so that we're not able to do obvious things. Because Burke's enemies won, it's turned everyone into diffident losers, too quote-unquote humble to believe anything. Burke again. Prejudice is of ready application in the emergency. It previously engages the mind in a steady course of wisdom and virtue, and does not leave the man hesitating in the moment of decision, skeptical, puzzled, and unresolved. Prejudice renders a man's virtue his habit, and not a series of unconnected acts. Through just prejudice, his duty becomes a part of his nature. In the last few generations, we've lost this. What should be strong convictions, we treat as personal preferences. We think we have to make a rational argument for being what our grandparents would call normal. We don't think we can act until we've dotted every I, and that's because we've allowed ourselves to be bullied by the rationalists. But it turns out you don't need permission from Neil deGrasse Tyson to tell someone to get their muddy shoes off your couch. I do think this is turning around. Since Trump came on the stage, people are more comfortable using the phrase, "we don't do that here," or
I don't really care, Margaret. I don't want that person in my country, and I think most Americans agree with me.
If this kind of confidence comes back, we might be able to do a lot of good. But as Russell Kirk said, prejudice and prescription are delicate growths, slow to rise, easy to injure, hardly possible to resuscitate. Cultural instincts are more like orchids than they are like dandelions. You can't just spray Roundup on them for 3 generations and expect them to pop back up when it's convenient. I don't think that healthy prejudice is dead, it's just been hiding, usually behind some rational argument. Because we've cut ourselves off from a lot of our healthiest instincts, we shouldn't trust everything we think. But we also shouldn't feel like we have to cite 14 studies before we can say, that's weird, somebody stop it. Everyone has cultural presuppositions, and we should value ours. Basic confidence in our untaught feelings is something we don't just need in the general populace. We need it in our commentators, our judges, and our
representatives.